300-mile-an-hour winds, or maybe as high as 500. You're looking at things being flash frozen. Now, has that happened in the past? Yes. We found frozen mammoths with subtropical plants in their mouths, like daisies and such. This mammoth did not even have time to swallow, and he was flash frozen.
Yeah, I have read those events. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There's been no explanation of it. Now we have one. A friend of mine called me, and he asked me if Planet X was real. And at the time, I told him that Planet X was not real, and that I'm pretty sure there wasn't any astronomical evidence for such a planet. And so after the conversation, I said, if I'm ever asked that again, I need to get the actual data together to better answer that properly. So I started to do a search. I came across my own data in the Chinese records, and that kind of really started it all off. Actually found a white paper, a scientific white paper report called the Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the Supernova of 1054. And what that did was it proved that our assumptions that it was the supernova, that it ended up proving it wrong, that this object was actually moving through the night skies, as documented by the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese astronomers. So when I read the article, I decided to attempt to plot its orbit, because the data was they had done such a good job in stating where the object was, the brightness, the time, the year, the day, all of the criteria that we need to try to have a plot of this orbit. And they had multiple sightings of it within a 26-month period. And so out of that, what astounded me was the plot of its orbit. It comes in the end of August. It goes around the sun, and then it exits during the month of Passover. That was quite astounding and shocking, or an object that's occurring in the same way as the biblical accounts are. This planet is clearly in the view of Earth and is gaining in size as it's approaching Earth. That's what was on the timing. We happen to know approximately the size now. There's three ways of calculating the size according to the data, as well as some of the Chinese accounts. And it roughly calculates between about 6.5 to 7.5 diameters of Earth. So I kind of took the average and I said 7. So I called it Planet 7X. At the same time, it helps to separate the data. When someone says something, you know where they're getting the information from, whether if it's the Samaritan text, Stitchen's work, or if it's someplace else on Earth, or if it's from the Chinese. That makes the distinction in the conversation as far as where the data is coming from. I'm the first one to get actual scientific data from the Chinese or anywhere that's actually verifiable. This is not hearsay. This is from a scientific report that's been through the peer review, and they list it as a NEO, a near-Earth object. This is going to be our Planet X. Now, if you go with 3,600-year orbit, people say this was Noah's flood. Well, you missed Noah's flood by over 700 years. So what event could it have done if it's not Noah's flood? 2, the Chinese saw this in 1054. That's less than 1,000 years ago. So how can it be 3,600 years?
Yeah, that always presented a problem to me.
Exactly. Once you start ironing out the problems, it narrows down the data to a reality. And what does it match in the real world? What's common in reading ancient languages, anything over 1,000 years ago, 0 did not exist. Zeros are implied in the text. That's left up to the interpreter to put as many zeros as he wish within reason on trying to estimate what they're trying to say. So Stitchen, when he read the clay tablets, what he literally read in the clay tablets was 6 times 6. Now, because of other data, they could tell the ancient Samaritans had a 60 unit of measure, 60. So he put the first number at 6, being 60. Then the next one, he said, on his memory alone, he's saying, it hasn't come through here before. So he dropped the number in there that it must be 60 times 60. Well, that gives you the 3,600-year orbit. But if you had left it at 60 times 6, he'd got 360-year orbit. It's through an assumption that it has not come through our solar system before, he went with 60 instead of 6. And that's how you get the 360, and that's been, everybody grabbed onto that. But there was no hard data because zeros did not exist. You have no information to plot its orbit. There's no documented, now what I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about what day, time, and place on Earth that it was seen, what constellation it was saw, what radius, what direction of travel, what's the brightness of it, was it by any known stars, and what angle from that known star. The only one to give us that type of detailed information is the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean records. Their astronomy goes back just a few hundred years after Noah's flood. That's how far their astronomy goes. Are they motivated on doing the work correctly? It was documented that 2 astronomers were caught at their post sleeping, and it was reported to the emperor. The emperor cut their heads off because he wanted reliable data of all comets and all happenings in the sky, because it was, to them, it was a very real threat, because this comet changes the weather pattern. Well, this planet, when it gets close enough, it'll have a tail.
So it is like a planet comet, actually.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. It does not meet our present terms. This is going to be called a brand new object in a way. It does not meet the full definition of a planet, and it's too big for the known comets. So they'll have to come up with a whole new category. That's why there's plausible, deniability by the politicians to be politically correct. You ask them, what about this planet? They'll say, what planet? There is no planet approaching. Well, then if you say what comet, they still say none. They changed the definition of a planet in, I think it was 208 or 206. Since then, unless you knew the new terms that they're going to use for it, you will not be able to corner them because it's politically not correct, as far as the terms used. But this object does not meet the definition of what they define as a planet today. Now, what's interesting on that, they have a problem because it says that one of the other cannot be a planet if it crosses another known planet's orbit. Well, this thing crosses Earth's path twice. Which one they going to disqualify, Earth or it as a planet? This thing is 7 times our diameter. They always give an excuse if it's smaller than and it crosses, therefore it cannot be. But this one's bigger. They have a problem with their definition. They're going to have to change something. They have to add something for any astronomers out there, if they wish, if they were to get the white paper report, as I stated earlier, they can plot it also. They can plot the orbital path of the representative models of each one of these incidents. There's an interesting saying there. Someone is saying how do you define science? A lot of people say the Bible doesn't meet scientific principle. That's not true anymore, or maybe never has. I'm just saying that it does now. The answer for what science is was defined in astrophysics. It says if you can take a paranormal phenomenon into the laboratory and show that it's repeatable, there's a word for that. They call it science. Well, we have multiple eyewitness accounts that we can literally build models with now, and it proves out their comments that they experienced and witnessed. And that is impossible for the time period. They had no concept of Kepler's laws of planetary motion or the forces ruling the universe. For them to get there is impossible. They saw a real object that caused real events for the time period.
Could this be the same object that is referred to as Hercules? And
yes,
I believe there was a scientist named Ferrara from South America that he talked about it before anybody even heard about anything related to this object. And the interesting thing that I bring him up, and the reason I'm bringing him up is because he's the first one I ever heard call this object a planet comet.
He is the closest because he's using actual planetary physics. Mm-hmm. He's not using hearsay.
I ever heard call this object a planet comet.
He is the closest because he's using actual planetary physics. His claim of this being a comet planet, absolutely right on. He's the first one to do it, and he's absolutely correct. This is what the data is proving.
Yeah, this is definitely something we have never seen before. So
well,
how would you...
Actually, there is some events that are misrecorded. We just never labeled it to this coming through our solar system. See, if Earth, the only time it gets close to Earth, if Earth is in the position of the month of Passover, which is March or April, when it's made its round around the sun, and it's also in the month of March or April. That's when it comes close. That's when it's the most severe. And it's happened Earth has tilted in its orbit when it's passed because it's like two magnets attracted to each other. The poles start to tilt. I have documented, I think, close to 4 times that Earth has tilted 26 to 28 degrees in its past.
Now, was this a gradual tilt? Gil, was this a gradual tilt or a sudden tilt?
There's no definite data. Through the models, looking at it, we can do a rough approximation. It's between, the tilt would take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours coming in and another 3 to 5 hours going out. The tilt would reverse itself. Now, if you're 90 degrees from the axis of tilt, the wind's 90 degrees from that tilt, you're looking at approximately, you're covering almost 2,000 miles of Earth's surface within 26 to 28 degrees. So you're looking anywhere from 500-mile-an-hour winds to 300-mile-an-hour winds. The Arctic Circle would reach Washington, D.C. area. If 90 degrees to the tilt was the west coast of Greenland, from our last calculations, the pivot point is going to be around Jerusalem on its tilt. Therefore, 90 degrees from that tilt gives you the west coast of Greenland. And if it tilts 26, 28 degrees, you're looking at the Arctic Circle temporarily coming down as far as Washington, D.C. at 200 to 300-mile-an-hour winds, or maybe as high as 500. You're looking at things being flash frozen. Now, has that happened in the past? Yes. We found frozen mammoths with subtropical plants in their mouths, like daisies and such. This mammoth did not even have time to swallow, and he was flash frozen.
Yeah, I have read those events. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There's been no explanation of it. Now we have one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This object comes about midway of the drought. You have 3.5 years drought coming in, 3.5 years drought as it leaves. You may ask, how do I know that Earth tilted? From an artifact in Germany called the Nibiru disk.
Yeah, can you explain that a bit, Gil?
The Nibiru disk was an artifact that grave robbers, I call that, but they weren't robbing a human grave, but they were robbing the site, ancient artifacts. They found this, I think, a copper disc with gold leaf objects that represent the star patterns, as well as the moon and the sun, and the surrounding area, the horizons. And the copper is tarnished a nice green. And they were caught trying to sell this. I think it was in maybe Switzerland somewhere. And the authorities caught them, the Germans already caught, and the object was brought back, and now it's in a museum. Now, they had a few experts that tried to discern everything, and then I've read them, and I kind of disagree with some of their findings. Number one, they say the lower part of this disc is not the horizon in front. They make the claim that it's the Egyptian boat Styx that ferries the dead across the river. Well, I got a question. How did the Germans in mid of Europe ever go to Egypt to be able to get this information? And instead, when you go to Google, when you go to the site where the ancient Miss Observatory is, and look where they were looking at in the night sky, exactly in front of them is an old riverbed. They have a dam that closed off the riverbed. They had to reroute the river because of the dam, but if you put it where the old river is, that's exactly what was in front of the observer, which is at the base of the Nibiru disk. Another thing that the experts missed was the moon, the illuminated side of the moon is facing the wrong direction. Illuminated side of the moon has to face towards the sun. So when they were looking at the moon, they said, well, with that shaped crescent, it was X amount of days old. let's say the cycle of a moon is 29 and something days old. Well, they got that wrong because now you got to reverse it 180 degrees. You know, it's either 3 days or it's 28 days, one of the two, somewhere. So they had the wrong time frame they're looking for. And so that throws off the timing on when to estimate the years on when this thing was made. They had estimated it was outside the Bronze Age, and they thought that was so phenomenal that it was outside the Bronze Age, but it was not because they were dating it wrong. Once I corrected the errors in it, opened the software and started looking for a date, it matched the same date, Joseph of Egypt. That disk, on the bottom left corner, there's a constellation called Orion. In the month of Passover, which this disk frames the month because it has a constellation to the right and a constellation to the left there, Gemini to the left and Capricorn to the right. Well, when Mr. Orion is seen from the bottom, you cannot see the constellation Mr. Orion from Germany during the time of March. Only way that you could do that is if the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. The sun is shown there, but you can't see the stars with the sun. So the sun is shown as an eclipse. It's being darkened. The moon to the right tells you the moon was not involved with this eclipse. You can only have a new moon to eclipse the sun. If it's in a crescent shape, that means it's not a new moon, and it cannot be it's involved.
Is there any idea who built this disk that you're referring to?
The disk, they can pretty much say that it was from the Nibiru colony, okay? And they had an ancient observatory there to where they could tell when the season started. So they were very in tune with the constellation and knowing when the year happened, when to plant the crops, when to harvest. That's why you have these ancient observatories. Because if you miss the planting season, your town could starve. It was very important at the time to better know when to plant and when to harvest. And that's what these things would help them with. So when they say it's coming from the south, you don't look from the South Pole. You look towards July, at the nighttime skies of July, okay, which is around Sagittarius. This is the same area of space where they sent the Voyager and Pioneer probes in that constellation. What were they looking for? They stated in multiple articles they were looking for a new planet because the outer planets are perturbed by gravity that's telling them that there's another unfounded planet further out. And Pluto does not calculate to be the one doing the perturbing of the other planet. Its mass is too small. They sent 3 satellites towards that direction. And around in 92, their instruments were able to triangulate their instruments that read gravity. The gravity instruments told them direction, height, and, and area where it's at to where they could triangulate. After that, NASA went silent on the whole subject of Planet X, and that's when they found it. Now, I estimated it was around 8 years or so outside of our solar system at the time. When it reaches Pluto, it takes 20 years to reach the sun. Kepler's law of the planetary motion at roughly 360-year orbit, it's going to take 20 years to reach the sun, and that's roughly around this next year. 16 and 17 is going to be a very interesting year. That's why you've seen all of this elevated earthquakes, weather patterns, animal life, death, you name it. It's multiple of items out there that you can name that are all elevated beyond its norm. We're in for some really phenomenal sights that are coming up. When this thing gets really close, when we start to go back through the tail again, you're going to see the aurora borealis go all the way down to the equator. And when that's super active, it hums like a trumpet when it's super active. You think there's trumpets going on.
Really?
And it's the aurora borealis going all the way down to the equator because the tail is plasma. And what is the aurora? The aurora is when you have like a solar flare and plasma hits the Earth, it causes the aurora. Okay? Well, we're going to have a huge amount of plasma hitting the magnetic field of Earth. And you'll see it excited, and it's going to go, you're going to see extreme amount of colors and sounds. You can go through when an impact from a large meteorite hit the Earth and 91% of our crust was knocked into space from the opposite side it is, because crust at the time, and still is, crust is only held on by gravity because it's not glued on. That's why we have continental drift. Well, if you go on Google Earth and look south of the ancient city of Baghdad, that's actually the mid-kingdom. If you look further south than that, that's where the old kingdom used to be during the time of this tower. And you see the outline of a square that is the base of the ancient ziggurat of Tower of Babel. And it has a moat around it, a water moat, because the base has sunken into the sand, leaving you this void to be filled up with water. So the data is checking out. Between the data of the Nibiru this and this, we can piece the actual date.
You know, when you know this facts that you're sharing with us tonight, it just comes alive. You look at it from a totally different perspective.
Yes, it does. Interesting is you can look at how far Earth travels in 1 hour. Earth travels 8.4 Earth diameters in 1 hour in its orbital path. That's how fast Earth is moving. If you take the angle of March 26 on its approach to Earth's path of this orbit during that time, you come up with 52.5 degrees. Now, what's interesting, before I had an actual date for this next event, I was going with an average. I just took it in the middle of the month, and it gave me closer to 40 degrees, and that's how I came up with that it was roughly 7 times the diameter Earth. But with the date given in Revelation 12:1, gives us an actual date using astronomy. Guess what this calculates to now? 6.6 gives us an actual date using astronomy. Guess what this calculates to now? 6.66 diameters of Earth. And Earth traveled through the magnetosphere of this planet, and that's what caused the rotational delay of 4.5 to 5.5% per hour compounded hourly, and you get the Earth to stop, as it's claimed. Well, I have a chart that shows how far Earth travels in 2 to 3 hours if this object passed roughly half the distance between the moon, and this exactly calculates correctly for the beginning and the start of a meteorite shower. Any super large explosion like a meteorite, if you're close enough, you're vaporized, just like it would be an atomic explosion, but it wasn't an atomic explosion, but it's like an atomic. Right. Now, if you take a look at what happened in Nagasaki, there's people's shadows that are still there today on the cement wall where they used to stay because they were vaporized. Well, let me give you some information that's hard numbers, okay? That's hard you can't dispute on where the object is at. It's going to come out of the constellation Sagittarius, okay? This is where the Voyager and Pioneer probes, look, there's 12 constellations on a planetary plane. Even if you would divide it in the vertical, another 12, what are the odds of it being the same constellation? Very high. Very high. So you got Voyager and Pioneer that went to that constellation. You got the biblical data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the Chinese data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the biblical data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the Chinese data that's pointing to that constellation. You got a UL study that new gravity is affecting the orbits of comets in that exact region of space, confirmed by a London astronomer that confirmed these same findings of comets that is affected in that same space. You got 5 studies that point to the same. We got hard data here. Look, you can take clay tablets, you can take papyrus scrolls, you can take any type of data. If you can bring it into a laboratory and reproduce it as a model, show that it's repeatable, that's science. I'm sorry, but the way they interpreted the Sumerian text cannot be produced a proper model that matches history. The 3,600-year orbit and coming out from some other does not match the repeated data throughout history. You can only have a new moon create an eclipse of the sun. And that's when, if you look at a new moon, it's totally black in the sky. So if they're referring to both of these objects having an eclipse, it has to be a third object. Because the moon has to be away from its new moon position. Whether it's in full moon or a quarter of that or whatever, it has to be away from its new moon for you to even see a difference in the moon, for it to be eclipsed in reddish color. And for the sun to be eclipsed, so you're talking about a third object. Therefore, the moon cannot be involved with a solar eclipse. It's the opposite side of Earth. It has to be on the inside.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And a moon can only give you 7.3 minutes of a solar eclipse, maximum. And it does not darken the whole Earth, as the text refers to. It only darkens a small path, and Earth rotates out of the shadow. That's why it can only last 7.3 minutes. So if you have an object, what I'm saying is 7 times the diameter of the Earth, or 6.5, somewhere in there, at a given distance, it will give you exactly 3 hours of darkness over the entire Earth, and also eclipse the moon at the same time. It is referring to a third object right here. In short, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot predict the future or even attempt in a way of saying unless I have data. The word in Hebrew was illuminated body, not sun. The Greeks, who are sun worshippers, would automatically put sun there because he's trying to fill in the blanks. Okay? That word does not represent sun. It represents a illuminated body. Leo is smack dab in the center of the nighttime skies at midnight. If you switch this object, this illuminated body, this planet X coming through here, its tail, just like a comet, the tail is pointing opposite of the sun, and guess what? It goes right through Virgo, the tail, illuminating Virgo only, as the text refers. The sun illuminates all the constellations, not just one. But the tail of this object in the model only illuminates Virgo. Only an object on a planetary plane of Earth can illuminate Virgo.
Okay.
So this gives us the date that this object is going to cross Earth path, and that's March 26th of 2016 is giving us a date. Now, from a model, I can put this in there, and using the 150-day separation, it tells me it enters at the end of August. It enters our inner solar system, rounds the sun, and exits out on March 26th, where we're about 2 hours behind it. For it to be in between the moon and the Earth, that means it's passing, and about 2 hours later, we're entering the debris field of its tail. CO7, now visually, the CO6 is going to be more of an impact visually. With the tilting of the Earth, the aurora borealis coming down to the equator, with the meteorite shower hitting one-third of the, burning one-third of the trees, one-third of the grass, and later it says one-third of the rivers, it is describing continental crust. With the tilting of the Earth, the aurora borealis coming down to the equator, with the meteorite shower hitting one-third of the, burning one-third of the trees, one-third of the grass, and later it says one-third of the rivers, it is describing continental crust. And we know that only half of the Earth is hit from meteorites coming from the sunny side. So what half of the Earth is one-third of the continental crust? North and South America. Exactly. Asia and Europe is two-thirds of the continental crust. This sign is this object. In other words, scientists will predict that the meteorite shower will hit the Middle East and Europe. After a 12-hour delay in its rotation, it doesn't. It hits North and South America.
So, needless to say, we are in for some pretty turbulent times in this next several months and years.
That there was a planet called Planet X. You've heard about this Planet X coming into our solar system, and it's all through history. It comes through about every 3,500 years. It comes through, and it's got a huge magnetic pull. And when it comes near Earth, it causes really big earthquakes and real bad, tsunamis and volcanoes all going off. Just really wrecks the place real bad. I was sitting in L.A. going, well, the water's coming in. I'm going to have to leave here. Where am I going to go? I don't know what's going to happen next. You just put one foot in front of the other, and you continue with the story. Rocky Mountains are newer than the Appalachians. You can see that the Rocky Mountains are very jagged edges, while the Appalachians are very smooth. That's because they were created at different times. That's evidence that there's been earth changes happening at different times. Also, the woolly mammoths that they found, they were frozen in solid ice that had green grass in their stomach. When you think about it, solid ice that's water coming in. And what were they eating, ice? No, they were eating green grass. So they had flowers and green grass in their stomach, and suddenly they're frozen in solid ice. How did this happen? And this was only, this could have happened at least 20,000 years ago.
Look at you.
You who don't believe that there's two suns in the sky, here's what it looks like out here today, and then back up.
You have to watch this in entirety. I apologize.
And you can see I'm looking through the glass, but I'm looking at an angle, so you might think, oh, it's the glass, but it's not. And wait until you see this.
This is nuts.
I should be using a tripod.
And it's not lens flare or whatever. Look at the clouds behind it. Between the two, or in front of it. You can see the clouds in front of it.
Reflection, there wouldn't be clouds in front of the second sun. So,
and then the reflection on the ocean,
if you go to
on the
the
water.
sunset.wordpress.com, you can see a lot more amazing videos that I've done.
More proof of two suns. Look up here, there's one, and number 2 on the bottom. You are lying to yourself if you don't believe this phenomenon is real. Do you not see all the bullcrap clouds that they're putting around it so you can't see it? They're trying to keep us from seeing it. Look at that. That is so obvious. 1, 2. I'm going to get closer.
Look at you.
again, you can hear the strange sound. Very clearly today. We don't know where the sound comes from, but it's stressing, and it's our garden lamps. And the moon is up here. But I leave my camp here on the tripod, and then we can hear the sound again.
'15, '16, '17, whatever Tuesday is in May 2015. You hear that sound? It's not space aliens. If anything, if you want to say space, the spraying they've done in the skies, as you can see up there is another faint spray trail all the way down that way. They put this stuff in the atmosphere for a reason. It's not up there just accidentally, and not an accident either.
You can't hide it anymore, people. Even with the chemtrailing, there it is. Directly behind the sun to the left. They've been chemtrailing to hide this thing. It's got to come out. It's going to come out. I'm taking it to the newspaper.
Something. Okay, and you can see, okay, that's just cooler parts of the sun, folks, because of action, whether magnetic, whether from a distance, eye magnification, contact, makes people do things, want to do things, and things happen, okay, space weather, okay, that electrical and that light propagation is coming from outer space, and we also, if you watch my last 2 or 3 videos, you will see factual, and as you can see, that is major activity on the sun, ladies and gentlemen. And that is active as deactive after a big CME. Because then it's not burning anymore right there as much as normal. It's hella hot, but material gets propagated up, it gets on fire, and it gets attracted. And we are politically correct here because the idea that we all know what causes in fuego. Attraction of atoms and electrical, you always see it. And it propagates. And it gets it on, or you wouldn't be here, ladies and gentlemen. So, attraction happens. We are getting CMEs from outer space. Our axis is moving. Stuff is actually happening. Just keep an eye on it, and not even a full moon and the light's getting lit up. Because this is attractive, and the sun is attractive to Rigel Kentaurus A, or whatever else in the supergiants, or whatever else is out there in space, because something's flying around the bedroom, and you can see it, okay? Electrical activity, friction, static. Either that or there's a couple of cats up there scratching around. That's not good, because then you don't get birth of anything if there's just a couple of cats scratching around. And all you do is see light. And we see this. We got weather in space. So things are happening. You can't hide it. And things are spiking. And the charts are a-flailing. And the truth will keep on bleeding at Beano Black. This somewhat does look good. Dropping down a little bit, okay? Calming down. But we do have massive CME action out there. I'm surprised electricity's flowing right now. But it takes a little while for it to get here, but it's a good thing we got weather propagation to keep everything else CPM and rads on Earth all right. And weather modification does exist.
Or a brown dwarf or some sort of large celestial object that comes through our solar system every once in a while and has been observed by other cultures such as the Sumerians, Babylonians. And people are saying that this object is going to come into the solar system and pass by the Earth on December 21st, 2012, of all dates. And I've studied physics in both the particle physics and astrophysics. And, right away I realized that this just really isn't probable. It is possible. There are rogue planets, there are rogue stars, there are rogue black holes that aren't attached to any solar system, that have been thrown out by any number of means and are just drifting around the galaxy and possibly in between the galaxies. But you have to realize that if this is as big as people say, which is as big as 90% of the sun, the effects of this thing would be felt long before it got anywhere close to any of the planets.
Sí. Ahí para el otro lado. Sí, ya estoy grabando ya. Esto no hay que tenerle miedo por si acaso. Eso es pura ceniza. Es mucho. La wea va a caer.
Boom! The Calbuco volcano, located in the Los Lagos region of southern Chile, nearly 14 kilometers south of the capital Santiago, has erupted violently. And as you can see here, amazing footage. And if you look closely at the night shots here, you can see some lightning going off. Fantastic footage of volcanic ash spraying into the sky. Evacuations have been ordered by officials. A nearly 12-mile radius of the population around the volcano has been ordered to get out of there, right? An extremely violent eruption here, and the Calbuco volcano hasn't erupted in nearly a half century. So this hasn't happened, I believe, in like 43 years. So it's somewhat of a rare event. And man, I tell you, some amazing stuff going on. Mother Nature, you know, it is scary sometimes, but you have to admire the power and the beauty of it. So, everyone in that region, stay safe. And by the way, there is a warning of possible ice caps and snow melting on the summit of this volcano, causing floods. So look out. Anyway,
I'll bring you some live pictures coming into us now from Chile, where the government has declared a red alert after the Calbuco volcano has started to erupt. So some quite dramatic pictures emerging there from Chile, where the Calbuco volcano is erupting, and the government has declared a red alert.
Yeah. Buscando agua. Sí, buscando agua.
Well, this one takes the cake. It's spread out a little since it was sprayed, and it was over a little more that direction. Just retarded. I know some fluoride head out there is going to say this is normal and have some really groovy sounding explanation for why airplanes are flying around in circles now and then shooting other trails through. You know, I watched the plane go by and do the little streamer, that portion of it. This is just beyond insane. And the rest of our sky is just, you know, it's a blue sky, clear day over here in Washington. But, you know, they're doing their best with all this nonsense.
Have you looked at the sky lately? They have created an artificial layer into our atmosphere known as chemtrails. This is a military operation that created a Star Wars shield or reflector shield that operates with the HAARP program. Are you aware of the huge Japanese nuclear waste dump and nuclear reactors unleashing a huge deadly plutonium cloud that will surround the whole northern hemisphere, which will keep killing all breathing life forever? Probably not if you are sheeple that feed on the corporate media diet that causes your brain to starve. Are you aware that all foods from the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean is now contaminated with lethal contaminants and poisons? Do not splash that poison water on your face to wake up. It contains deadly rat poison you call fluoride. Time for breakfast after your nightmare? So you're going to eat some unknown to nature food now. Almost all foods you now eat is genetically modified, and you're not allowed to be told on the food labels of this. You are no longer going to be permitted to eat any natural foods or vitamins. Only artificial foods will be permitted. They already erected humanity's tombstone they call the Georgia Guidestones. I was not kidding when I told you to wake up out of your real-life nightmare. You have been sleepwalking your whole life while living in the dream world that has also been socially engineered and created for you. They have been programming you and all of society into a dream state. Medical doctors no longer save lives. Instead, they just make dying profitable by medically prescribed pain management while they put you through any and all sorts of tortures. The trick is to keep you alive as long as possible to maximize profits. And when the profits die, so will you.
Oinar, look at you. Oh, hey, just give me some of them peanut butter jelly sandwiches.
La la la. That's what I'm talking about. Wow!
I know it sounds crazy.
Hey.
Oinar, look at you.
La la la. That's what I'm talking about. Wow!
Aliens are coming. Are you prepared? Hey.